Well, how do you, based on your work, right, like your practice in ATRs or Lucumi, how does your practice address, like, what has been your experience, or at least what have you witnessed around the way like Black, queer, and trans folks have experienced the practices of Lucumi? Like, what have you noticed?
Things that anybody who's received a reading will know, because I want to be mindful. So much of what we do is sacred, right? Like, I want to be mindful that I'm not sharing things that are not permitted to be discussed widely. But when we're talking about receiving a reading, let's talk about that, which is most people's first entry point into the spiritual system, right? So they may see a Babalaon, they may see a Babalosha or Neolosha, and they go and they receive a spiritual reading because they want to get some information about their life. That diviner is going to ask you for your name, and that diviner is asking you for your birth name, right? So if you are a queer individual and you've changed your name, right? And if there's still trauma associated with deep emotion and maybe even grief associated with saying your birth name, and the diviner is asking you for your birth name, that can be a trauma point if you don't expect that, right? If in certain types of ceremonies that we do, depending on how people depending on the ceremony that's being done and the I'll say genderized, body parts that you're born with, right? So if you're someone who is born with a womb, someone who is not born with a womb, then you may have different things to do in that ceremony that may or may not fit your gender, right? Your gender identity. And so that can create harm or cause harm, bring up harm, depending on who's explaining that to you, depending on how you're being oriented, right? Because you'll be in a space and they'll just say, "All women turn around." And so what if you don't identify as being a woman, but you have a womb, right? Or they'll say men do this, women do this. And so how does that impact you, right? Or if you go to a diviner who is not trauma informed, who is not LGBTQ informed, and you physically present to what they would identify as a man, right? And you give the name Linda as your birth name. You may be dealing with someone who looks at you a certain way. You may be dealing with someone who is confused. You may be dealing with someone who, you know what I mean, who now has a lot of questions before they can proceed with the service that you're paying for. And you may be dealing with someone who has a lot of judgment. And then that judgment comes up in the information that is being provided. And so we have to be aware that what is done for a reason, is often done for a purpose, and the language by which that is communicated, how that is communicated, how you're even oriented. When you go into ceremony, when you go into service, nobody's telling you what you're getting ready to do. And actually, many things you cannot know what you're getting ready to do until you're in the middle of doing it. So you have no idea what's going to be asked of you. You have no idea what is going to show up in the body as a trigger that this feels unsafe, this feels different, this doesn't feel what I thought I was getting ready to go into. So it can be very, very, very jarring.